Here's what's coming up on The World Today. UK Defense Ministry says Russian President Vladimir Putin poised to announce annexation of Ukrainian regions as Russia stages final day of voting in referendums. European countries investigating mystery leaks in two major gas pipelines between Russia and Europe. Plus, state funeral held for former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe amid protests. Hello again, and thanks for joining us. I'm Teniola Oyetayo in Lagos. Let's begin in Russia, where President Vladimir Putin is said to be preparing to announce the annexation of occupied regions in Ukraine within days. Well, that's according to the UK's Defense Ministry, which is expecting the announcement as early as Friday. Well, it comes as Russia stages a final day of voting in discredited referendums in occupied regions of Ukraine.
It's the final day of voting in discredited referendums in occupied regions of Ukraine. The vote is being held simultaneously in 4 Ukrainian regions partly controlled by Moscow: Kherson, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia. Ukraine and the West say the result has already been decided by the Kremlin and will be used as an excuse for an illegal land grab. Russia maintains that the referendums offer an opportunity for people in the region to express their views. The areas where the discredited vote are being held represent 15% of Ukraine's territory. Russia has vowed to give any annexed land full protection, which could include its nuclear arsenal. Analysts say this will probably lead to an escalation in the conflict, as Moscow could argue that any attack on those regions will be seen as an attack on Russia itself. The Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, in his nightly address, vowed to take tough action against the vote. U.S. President Joe Biden's administration has already warned Russia that if any annexation of territory takes place, it's ready to impose more economic sanctions.
Prime Minister at 3:30.
According to the British Ministry of Defense, Russian President Vladimir Putin is likely to announce the accession of occupied regions of Ukraine to Russia during his address to Parliament.
Well, let's talk to the VOA's Anna Chenikova. She's in Kyiv. Anna, we're hearing that the first results from the referendum in the occupied regions of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, People's Republic and Luhansk, People's Republic show an overwhelming majority voted in favor of joining Russia. How bothered is the Ukrainian government about this piece of information?
Good evening. Well, we all should understand that this kind of referendum, which is definitely not going to be recognized by neither Ukrainian side nor any international community, not any of the countries in Europe and of course US. So we should understand that this referendum is something that so the results were written before, and when Russian media announce any kind of results or announce that 90% of the votes have been counted and so on and so forth, we should remember that this is something that basically that was counted before the referendum was even announced. So it's definitely something which cannot be considered under any law and under any international rules of how, this kind of things, votes should take place. Ukrainian government said once again, and President Zelensky in particular, that any kind of referendum would end any possibility for further negotiations with the Russian side. And President Zelensky repeated this once again in light of these actions which are taking place now in the occupied territories. So Ukrainian official position is that this is not going to be recognized. Ukraine would never recognize any of results, and Ukraine would consider and would see these territories as Ukrainian territories and would defend these territories.
I mean, I remember when Crimea was annexed by Russia, Western partners promised to react. They imposed sanctions, they condemned the action, but nothing. Russia is still in control of Crimea. How likely do you think this might happen, and the difficulty in regaining these regions from Russia, as we've seen with Crimea?
Well, these two situations are very similar, but also very different. So this is not, of course, it could be, you know, it could be analyzed in light of what happened in Crimea, but we should also understand that this is very different. And definitely Ukraine, well, Ukraine would expect more serious reaction from the international partners, from Europe, from the US. We already hear certain announcements from the US side and from European representatives about the possible reaction for that, and some countries even say even already impose certain sanctions because of these referendums even taking place. Definitely Ukraine expects more serious reaction, and because it's you know, it just goes over the limit, I guess, for any kind of possible war crime that Russia has already conducted in Ukraine, and especially it goes in parallel and in line at the same time when Ukrainian forces advance and liberate more and more territories, especially in Kharkiv region. And when Ukrainian forces liberated Kharkiv region, we saw a lot of war crimes conducted by Russia against civilians in particular. So definitely it should be much stronger reaction, and Ukraine would definitely expect this, and Ukrainian reaction would also be, at least this is how it was put here, it would be also quite serious.
Okay, let's cross the border for a bit and talk about the military enlistment going on in Russia. How does the Ukrainian government feel about that and President Putin's threat of use of nuclear weapons?
Ukrainian officials, both military officials and political representatives, already said that it doesn't matter how many people would join Russian aggression against Ukraine more, but Ukrainian forces would continue to defend its country, its people. And I had a chance to talk to some of Ukrainian soldiers. They said that they don't care how many people are on the other side of the front line. They will defend, and they will kill all of them. And this is basically the reaction in general. We can put it this way. Ukrainian officials also said that this is not going to change anything in Ukrainian planning or Ukrainian defense. So Ukraine will continue its own plan and its own way of defense. In terms of nuclear weapon, well, it's taken very seriously, of course, because no one knows, and President Zelensky mentioned this in one of his latest speeches, that no one knows what President Putin had in mind, and of course it should be taken seriously because this is a direct threat. But again, Ukrainian military will not change its plans. Ukrainian military would continue to defend its land and liberate its territories as much as they can.
All right, then, VOA's Anna Chenikova, thank you so much for the update, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
And more from the Russian President Vladimir Putin, who says farmers are among the Russians being drafted into the military, signaling potential further risk for the 2023 crop. Russia is the world's largest wheat exporter, and the autumn season is a busy one for farmers as they sow winter wheat for the next year's crop and harvest soybeans and sunflower seeds. Winter grain sowing has already been significantly delayed by rains. The Russian president has called up hundreds of thousands of reservists for the war in Ukraine, but a lot of citizens have been rushing into neighboring countries, with Kazakhstan, Georgia and others seeing a large influx of Russian men of military age since the announcement. The call by the Russian president has been the first public mobilization since World War II. Well, the United Nations has been keeping tabs on the movement of Russians across borders as many try to flee conscription into the military. The UN human rights spokeswoman, Ravina Shamdasani, said over 2,300 people demonstrating against the mobilization have been arrested since last Wednesday in various locations across the country, and it's unclear how many people remain in detention. President Putin's announcement summoning recruits as part of the partial mobilization in an attempt to improve the situation on the front line in Ukraine after a decisive counter-offensive by the Ukrainian military has triggered protests in dozens of cities across the country. And the United Nations has also condemned the dire human rights situation from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has also led to a wide range of rights violations, including extrajudicial killings and torture that could amount to war crimes. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights said in a report that it's particularly concerned about torture and ill treatment of detainees by Russian forces and affiliated armed groups, but said there had been rights violations by both sides. The head of mission for the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, Matilda Bogner, held a news conference to present the report.
The vast majority of civilian casualties that we have documented since the 24th of February were caused by the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, for the most part by Russian armed forces and affiliated armed groups. Shelling from heavy artillery, such as multiple launch rocket systems and missile and air attacks, include weapons that carry cluster munitions, were used repeatedly. While OHCHR has not been able to assess compliance with international humanitarian law for each individual incident, the scale of damage and destruction strongly indicates that violations of international humanitarian law have occurred. The heavy toll that these weapons have had on civilians is evident. The armed conflict has led to a wide range of violations of the rights to life, liberty and security of persons for both civilians and combatants. We are gravely concerned by the unlawful killings, including summary executions of civilians by Russian armed forces in more than 30 settlements in Kiev, Chernihiv, Kharkiv and Sumy regions. Following several field visits to settlements in Kiev and Chernihiv regions, we've corroborated willful killings of civilians by Russian armed forces. In some cases, they shot civilians while fleeing in their vehicles, crossing the road on foot, or gathering basic foodstuffs, sometimes by snipers. In other cases, the killings amounted to summary executions.
As for other developments, the Prime Ministers of Poland and Denmark have both expressed concern following news of unexplained leaks in two Russian gas pipelines running under the Baltic Sea. Leaks in the two Nord Stream gas pipelines prompted Sweden's Maritime Authority to issue a warning and Denmark to restrict shipping in 5 nautical mile radius. Denmark's Prime Minister said the leaks showed the urgency of reducing European dependence on Russian gas, while Poland's Prime Minister described the leaking pipelines as an act of sabotage.
The very concerning events of yesterday, with leaks from Nord Stream 1 and 2, highlights the urgency of increasing our energy security in Europe. From the very beginning, the idea of Baltic Pipe was to make Poland independent of Russian gas and, of course, to contribute to energy security and independence for all of Europe. By working together, we have made this vision a reality, and it is more important than ever.
Well, the European Union, however, thinks it's premature to speculate on the cause of leaks in the two Nord Stream pipelines designed to bring gas from Russia to Europe. The Commission's chief spokesman, Eric Mamer, told a regular news briefing that it was clearly an act of sabotage, which the EU condemns. Another spokesperson says the Commission is following developments on the leaks closely and so far does not see any impact on Europe's security of supply.
Yeah, Karen, at this stage, it's very premature. Karen, at this stage, it's very premature to speculate on what the causes are. As I said, we've been informed about the situation by the member states concerned, and the member states are looking into this issue. We will remain in close contact with them, but it's really not the moment to speculate on what the potential causes could be and any coincidences that may or may not be there.
Obviously, any act of sabotage on any infrastructure is something that we would condemn. As to further reactions, we will have to see, depending on the exact facts, once they are determined.
Earlier today, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba called on the European Union to impose economic sanctions on Russia to punish it for staging annexation votes in 4 occupied regions, and said the move by Moscow would not change Ukraine's actions on the battlefield. Kuleba had held talks with his French counterpart, Catherine Colonna, and said personal sanctions would not suffice as punishment for the referendums built by Russia as a prelude to its annexing 4 Ukrainian regions. Russia has been holding votes for a 5th and final day today in 4 Ukrainian regions, partly controlled by Moscow. Well, they are Kherson, Luhansk, Donetsk and Zaporizhia, on whether or not to secede to Russia. The Western Kyiv say the referendums are illegal and a sham. And in other stories, Japanese consul in the eastern Russian city of Vladivostok was blindfolded and restrained by Russia's security services, and that's according to Japan. Motoki Tatsunori was only free today after being accused of spying and given 48 hours to leave Russia. Moscow alleges he received secret information about its cooperation with an unnamed Asian country. Japan denies the allegation and is demanding a formal apology. Russia's FSB security service said it had detained him on Monday for soliciting information about the impact of Western sanctions on Moscow after its invasion of Ukraine in February. Thanks for staying with us. Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated in July in the last days of an election campaign, has been laid to rest today at the end of a long-awaited state funeral, which sparked tensions and controversies over the past few weeks. The ceremony was held at the Nippon Budokan Arena in the capital, with the participation of 4,300 guests, 700 from abroad.
With flowers, prayers and a 19-gun salute, Japan honors slain at the premiere in 55 years. The ceremony started with Abe's ashes carried into the Nippon Budokan Hall in central Tokyo by his widow, Aki, to music from a military band and the booms of the honor guard salute, which echoed inside the hall. A moment of silence was followed by a retrospective of Abe's political life and speeches by leading ruling party figures, including Fumio Kishida and Yoshihide Suga, Abe's successors as prime ministers. Speaking from his point of view as Abe's friend, Suga noted that many people in their 20s and 30s had shown up to offer flowers.
Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Brunei Darussalam.
Foreign dignitary guests included US Vice President Kamala Harris, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and President of the International Olympic Committee Thomas Bach. Abe was widely admired abroad, but he was a divisive figure at home. As the ceremony began, thousands of protesters marched on the streets of Tokyo, carrying placards and shouting slogans against the state funeral of the former Japanese Prime Minister. Many of those who oppose the funeral and Abe's political legacy are older Japanese. In a country traumatized by war, the older generation has long favored a pacifist constitution that has kept Japan from heavily investing in its military. Abe, however, sought to change that, not by a referendum or parliamentary process, but by reinterpreting the constitution. The 67-year-old politician was assassinated in July, shot twice by a homemade gun. The killing shocked the country unused to gun crimes or political violence.
And away from Japan, Hurricane Ian has been churning across Cuba as a Category 3 storm with winds of up to 205 kilometers per hour. Hundreds of thousands of residents in the west of the island have been left without power because of storm damage. Forecasters have warned of the risk of storm surges, flash floods and mudslides. Ian is expected to strengthen en route to Florida. The governor there has spoken of a major disaster. All over in Florida, the governors urge residents to heed evacuation warnings as Storm Ian approaches.
I know.
We'll have more on the situation in Cuba and Florida in just a moment. But in the meantime, Kenya's worst drought in 4 decades has killed almost 2% of the world's rarest zebra in 3 months and 25 times more elephants than normal over the same period. It's starving Kenya's farmed wildlife of normal food sources out in the open and driving them into deadly conflict with people as they roam wider to the edges of towns and villages in a desperate search for food.
At the Sambusa National Reserve in Kenya's arid north, Andrew Latura stands over the carcass of a gravy zebra. It's the world's most endangered zebra, and amidst the Horn of Africa's worst drought in 4 decades, more are dying. Latura, a monitoring officer at the Gravy Zebra Trust, says almost 2% of the 2,500 population in Kenya has died in the past 3 months. That's the amount they expect to lose over a whole year.
Since June, when we started supplementing the zebras, we've lost around 40 gravies have died. And it's a serious threat to us and also a fear that if we're losing 40 within 3 months, what will that mean to the remaining population? So we're working around hard, around the clock to feed the numbers to make sure that we make the population survive through the drought.
Conservationists say drought is starving Kenya's wildlife. As food sources disappear, animals are driven closer to towns and villages and into deadly conflict with people. The Gravy Zebra Trust has begun feeding the zebras hay mixed with molasses, salt and calcium. Latura says that's been crucial to prevent foals and their lactating mothers from dying.
Like right behind me is a group that we are feeding. It has a lot of foals. It's lactating females. If we didn't have to feed this or supplement these individuals, the mothers will not even be able to nurse their foals. And we'll have a lot of, foals dying, and even, the lactating females, most of the zebras will die, because we look around, it's only dry twigs around. They don't have much to pick. So we only come in that moment where it seems now like the hay is the only thing that they're surviving on. So if we didn't come in to supplement them, we'll have a lot of mortalities.
But it's not just zebras, and not just in Kenya's north. Across the country, conservationists and rangers have reported increased numbers of animals dying, including elephants. A ranger in the southern Kitenden Conservancy says the stench of rotting animal carcasses is so strong that some tourists wear protective masks. Experts say the crisis isn't only attributable to drought. There are other issues at play, such as overgrazing by livestock. But for Latura, what's frightening is the prospect that Kenya's rains might be again about to fail. Experts say the Horn of Africa is on track for a 5th failed rainy season. Without interventions to protect the wildlife, conservationists say animals in many parts of Kenya could face an existential crisis.
And now the 66th IAEA General Conference is taking place at the agency's headquarters in Austria this week. Representatives from the IAEA's 175 member states are convening at the conference. Under the theme Global Cooperation in the Nuclear Field, the focus is not only on nuclear security and the role of the IAEA, but also on Iran's build-up of highly enriched uranium stockpiles, as well as the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the accompanying nuclear threats from Russia.
It's the 66th annual regular session of the International Atomic Energy Agency IAEA General Conference taking place at the Vienna International Center, Austria. Here, high-ranking officials and over 2,000 participants from IAEA member states, including Nigeria, international organizations, NGOs, are considering a range of issues, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine taking center stage.
From the beginning of
At the opening ceremony, the DG of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, spoke of his visit to Ukraine and the need to act to prevent a nuclear tragedy.
If something happens there, we will not have a natural catastrophe to blame for. We will just have our own inaction, because we knew what needed to be done. And there is a plan on the table to do it. Last week, I had an opportunity to start consultations with Ukraine and with the Russian Federation on the urgent establishment of a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This is possible. This must be done.
He also identified climate change mitigation and energy security as key drivers of decisions to continue or expand the use of nuclear power.
This issue is, of course, very closely linked to the climate change and the energy crisis we are undergoing. And we know that by virtue of this convergence, which was not imaginable before, many countries, confirmed users of nuclear energy, but also many others are looking at nuclear energy as a way to ensure their energy needs and also to address another existential crisis that we are facing in the global warming phenomenon that we know.
On the sidelines of the meeting, Nigeria signed a bilateral cooperation agreement with the IAEA for the deployment of Internet Reactor Laboratory, IRL, on the use of research reactor for nuclear courses at the university level. The project is facilitated by the Nigeria Atomic Energy Commission. The conference, which continues till the 30th of this month, is bringing together member states from around the world on issues of nuclear solutions to global challenges. Millicent Walker, Channels Television News.
And over in Canada, more than a third of customers in the Canadian province of Nova Scotia are without power. 2 days after powerful storm Fiona battered the east coast of the country, sweeping homes into the sea and leaving one person dead. The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has met with linemen before they departed for eastern Canada to aid in the effort to restore power to the region. Thousands of residents across the region are left without power and dealing with patchy telecom communications. Fiona was one of the worst storms to hit Canada, and government officials have said it could take months before infrastructure could be fully restored. The Army has been sent to the area to help with rescue and cleanup efforts, with other impacted provinces, including Newfoundland and Labrador and Prince Edward Island, being offered federal assistance.
As you know, the storm has passed, but thousands of homes are still experiencing power outages, and the scale of the damage means that people are still facing a tough time. Many parts of Nova Scotia and PEI, as well as southwestern Newfoundland, continue to experience the effects and damage left by the winds and coastal flooding. I want to offer my condolences to the loved ones of the woman who lost her life in Port aux Basques, and to the loved ones of the person who passed away in Prince Edward Island. Canadians are thinking of you in these difficult times. Our thoughts are also with people who've lost homes or businesses, people who've been evacuated and aren't sure when they're going to be able to get home, people who are having difficulty accessing services and support due to road washouts and debris, and people with young kids who won't be going to school today. I want, of course, to thank first responders for their incredible work this weekend and the work they continue to do, as well as thanking Atlantic Canadians who, as always, are being good neighbors to one another, looking out for each other, because that's what Atlantic Canadians do. That's what all Canadians do.
Well, let's head back to the United States now, where residents across Florida are scrambling to place sandbags around their homes and stockpile emergency supplies, emptying store shelves as Hurricane Ian spun toward the state, carrying high winds, torrential rains, and a powerful storm surge. We have our correspondent, Maria Byrd, on in the United States to speak to us about this. Maria, thank you so much for joining us on the program. But just before that, let's listen to the governor, who just spoke a few minutes ago, urging residents to heed to evacuation warnings.
There's still uncertainty with where that exact landfall will be. But just understand the impacts are going to be far, far broader than just where the eye of the storm happens to make landfall. In some areas, there will be catastrophic flooding and life-threatening storm surge. As you look to see what is going on with the local counties, there's evacuation orders that are in place on all these counties from Pasco and Pinellas down to the Fort Myers area. And our recommendation is to heed those evacuation orders. What those evacuation orders are doing is identifying people that live in areas that are vulnerable to major storm surge. And that storm surge can be life-threatening, but when you have 5 to 10 feet of storm surge, that is not something that you want to be a part of. And Mother Nature is a very fearsome adversary. So please heed those warnings. You do not need to evacuate to another state. You don't need to go hundreds of miles away. There's shelters that are open in all of these counties at this point. The important part of if you're under an evacuation order is evacuate to higher ground that is going to be safe from the type of surge and flooding that we're fearing with this storm. But anticipate interruptions, anticipate wind, anticipate a lot of rain. And of course, we have rivers and waterways all throughout the state of Florida, including the interior, that are in danger of overflowing under those circumstances. And so just continue to watch the weather wherever you are in the state of Florida heed the advice of your local officials, but this is definitely something that is getting closer and closer, and so act now to do what you need to do to protect yourself and your family.
If you live in an evacuation zone and you decide to shelter in place, make sure you have enough supplies to weather the storm. We may be without power 3, 5, 7 days or more, depending on the situation.
Let's remember, Ian was a Category 2 hurricane as of Monday evening, packing winds over 100 miles per hour and expected to intensify before making landfall in Cuba. Forecasters said that once Ian left Cuba, the storm could make landfall north of Tampa Bay early on Friday or turn northwest towards Florida. The Biden administration has declared a public health emergency for the state and says it's working with local officials to provide support. Well, signs of the impending storm were seen throughout Florida last night, a state of 21 million people. Now, we're still in the United States. As Storm Ian approaches Florida, we have our correspondent, Maria Byrd, joining us on the program. Maria, just before the break, we heard there from Florida's governor warning people to heed evacuation warnings. Now, how long do people have to evacuate? When are we expecting this storm to make landfall?
People have just a few days, if that. They're expected to start to see some impact of the storms tomorrow, but it will not be obviously the eye of the storm, which they're expecting sometime on Friday. And so they are encouraging people to begin evacuation now, especially those in the Tampa Bay area and those who are familiar with that part of the U.S. It's right there near the Gulf of Mexico. And so that is can create a very harsh wind tunnel there because you're kind of engulfed in that area, and as I mentioned, the catastrophic floods that could happen is definitely highly likely in those communities. But they're also hitting those who are more inland, just due to the fact that they're expecting a Category 4 hurricane. Those of you who remember Hurricane Katrina was a Category 5, and that had major devastating impacts. And so this is just one level below the Category 5, but it is expected it will have a much larger spread across the Florida region. And you are talking about a location that is in a Gulf Stream area. And as you heard the governor mention, there's many rivers, many waterways in this part of Florida that could obviously flood and create much damage. And we know the U.S. is struggling with an infrastructure challenges. And so the infrastructure is not yet prepared to be able to handle these types of storms.
And Maria, the Biden administration has declared a public health emergency for the state. What does this mean? What support does this provide for the state?
Well, FEMA will definitely be on board. FEMA went to Puerto Rico when Hurricane Fiona, and so Hurricane Ian will have a very similar circumstance where you will begin to see additional FEMA personnel coming to the communities, coming to the area, ensuring that as you just showed, sandbags are being filled, put around homes, that supplies are available in there. They'll also be there when the eye of the storm does hit, and days after. You probably will see, 2 to 3 and even longer, potentially, weeks of FEMA support in that region.
And speaking of Storm Fiona, we know the Biden administration did offer some support to Puerto Rico when the storm hit there. Just speak to us a bit more about that.
And so when that storm hit, one of the FEMA administrators, the head of that agency, actually went to see what the damage was. They were there on ground. There were many FEMA personnel that went on to actual Puerto Rico to be able to assist individuals whose homes had been destroyed as a result, those who were dealing with flooding, helping to ensure, as you mentioned, health and safety, anyone that had any health concerns or health issues. So really, they're all about the emergency response and emergency readiness for the community. And so they'll do that same sort of work for the state of Florida as well.
Thank you so much for the update. And over in Vietnam, thousands have been forced to evacuate as an intensifying Typhoon Noru barreled towards the Southeast Asian nation after causing at least 8 deaths and widespread flooding in the Philippines. Vietnam's meteorological agency said wind speeds were seen reaching 183 kilometers per hour, adding that Noru is expected to make landfall in Vietnam on Wednesday before weakening and moving on to Thailand. The typhoon forced airports in Vietnam to close and caused travel disruption, according to official statements. The government said around 270,000 military personnel were placed on standby, while footage from state media showed people fortifying their homes with bricks and sandbags. The hardest hit areas were expected to be central provinces, home to the Dong Quai oil refinery, and Quang Nam, home to the World Heritage Site of Oin An. And away from the weather, at least 76 protesters have been killed by Iranian security forces during 11 days of unrest sparked by the death of a woman in custody, and that's according to activists. Iran Human Rights, a Norway-based organization, accused authorities of using disproportionate force and live ammunition to suppress the dissent. State media have put the number of dead at 41, including several security personnel, and blamed what they called rioters. Hundreds of people have also been arrested, 20 of them journalists. The risk of torture and ill treatment of protesters is serious, and the use of live ammunition against protesters is an international crime, and that's according to IHR's director, Mahmoud Amiri. He adds that the world must defend the Iranian people's demands for their fundamental rights. The UN Human Rights Office also says it's very concerned by the authorities' violent response and urged them to respect the right to peaceful protest. And over in Italy, fresh from her victory in the elections, the country's new Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, now has to decide who will get top jobs in the right-wing government she's expected to lead. Ms. Meloni, head of the far-right party Brothers of Italy, has kept out of view since her election win when she promised to govern for all Italians. The question is who will fill the key jobs and whether they will go to other parties in her right-wing alliance. Matteo Salvini, for example, was known to covet the Interior Ministry. The head of the far-right League had the job in 2019 when he barred rescue boats carrying migrants from entering Italian ports. Ms. Meloni has likewise promised a tough response to irregular migration, but reports in Rome suggest Mr. Salvini will miss out on reprising his role. And over in Britain, opposition Labour Party says it would set up a publicly owned energy company within a year of coming to power if it wins the next election, and that's according to leader Keir Starmer. He says it would lower bills and help deliver energy independence. It also adds that a publicly owned company would help ensure that energy produced in Britain benefited the British people at a time where government has been forced to step in and support people with their sky-high bills. Labour are adding opinion polls where no election is expected until 2024. Starmer has called for the support package for bills to be funded through a windfall tax on energy companies rather than borrowing, and on Sunday announced an aim to make Britain's electricity 100% green by 2030. Labour also says it would work with the private sector to deliver its plans for clean power in strategic partnership with the new publicly owned firm.
That's why today I'm so proud to launch our Green Prosperity Plan, a plan that will turn the UK into a green growth superpower. And driving the plan forward is a goal that will put us ahead of any major economy in the world. 100% clean power by 2030. Just look at what's happening at the moment. The largest onshore wind farm in Wales. Who owns it? Sweden. Energy bills in Swansea are paying for schools and hospitals in Stockholm. The Chinese Communist Party has a stake in our nuclear industry. And 5 million people in Britain pay their bills to an energy company owned by France. So we will set up Great British Energy within the first year of a Labour government. A new company that takes advantage of the opportunities in clean British power. And because it is right for jobs, because it is right for growth, because it is right for energy independence from tyrants like Putin, then yes, conference, Great British Energy will be publicly owned.
The new Prince and Princess of Wales, William, and his wife Catherine, have carried out their first Welsh visit with their new royal titles. The couple returned to royal duties for the first time since the death of William's grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, after observing a period of mourning for members of the royal family, which lasted until Monday, September the 26th. The couple lived on the island of Anglesey off the coast of North Wales when they were first married, and William, now heir to the throne, worked as a Royal Air Force search and rescue helicopter pilot there. William and Kate, both 40, visited volunteers and crew members of the Holyhead lifeboat station. They went on to meet with local business representatives and members of the Coast Guard at a nearby bar, as well as mingling with crowds who had lined the street for a chance to see them. The office said the couple had a deep connection and affection for Wales and would be spending more time there in their new roles, which were announced by William's father, King Charles III, in his first address to the nation after the Queen's death.
We've got Harold Jones as well, our Deputy Station Officer, volunteer for Holyhead, and the Station Officer here as well, Alan the same. So obviously, where's your office here? Is it, you can literally...
And finally on the programme, Orthodox Christians in Ethiopia pray for peace as they mark the annual festival of the Meskel, a commemoration of the discovery of the true cross on which Jesus is believed to have been crucified. A nearly 2-year war has killed thousands, displaced millions, and created humanitarian disaster in the north of the country.
The shadow of war hung over the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's celebration of the Meskel festival in the capital Addis Ababa on Tuesday, with high security, low turnout, and clergy preaching about the need for peace and forgiveness. The festival, which according to the Church's teachings commemorates the findings by the Roman Empress Saint Helena in the 4th century of the true cross in which Jesus was crucified, is a high point of Ethiopia's religious calendar. As they do year after year, hundreds of priests, musicians and singers clad in traditional white robes gathered on the vast expanse of Meskel Square in central Addis for a series of rituals culminating in the lighting of a giant bonfire. But while the pageantry was as mesmerizing as ever, the mood was darker than usual, with the war in the northern region of Tigray having recently flared up again after several months of relative quiet.
Truly speaking, this year, we Ethiopians are not celebrating the festival in full happiness, partly because, just like the mothers were crying under the cross, our mothers in the north are also crying. They are under suffering. This suffering is common for all of us. It's our own, of course, but there are external actors in it.
The war in Tigray, which broke out in November 2020 and has at various times spilled over into other regions, has killed thousands of people, displaced many more, and left an estimated 13 million people in desperate need of food aid.
On this day, my prayer for the new year is that God says enough, because He's the honor of peace, and He declared peace through His cross by denouncing hatred. I believe and I hope that we will come together and have a peaceful year as a result of His forgiveness.
The warring parties are Ethiopia's federal army, regional forces allied with it, and the Eritrean military against forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the party that controls Tigray's regional government. The central government and its allies accuse TPLF, which long dominated Ethiopia's ruling coalition, of seeking to reassert its dominance, while the TPLF accuses the central government of abusing its powers and oppressing Tigray.
That's the program. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Oitayo.